Two of Congress's most outspoken members faced each other across a narrow wooden table, divided not by distance, but by years of deep political difference. On one side sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, calm and collected, her expression unreadable. The soft overhead lights reflected off her charcoal suit as she rested her hands, gently, on a neatly arranged stack of notes. She didn't glance at the cameras. She didn't have to. Her quiet confidence spoke louder than words. Across from her sat Representative Ilhan Omar, equally composed, yet with a hint of impatience behind her eyes. Her colorful headscarf stood out against the muted brown tones of the room. She had prepared thoroughly for this day. Her staff had briefed her, reviewed her talking points, and assured her that this would be a routine hearing. But something about Crockett's stillness made her uneasy. It wasn't hesitation. It was assurance, the kind that comes from someone who already knows how the conversation will end. The chairman's gavel struck sharply. This committee will now resume its proceedings. The murmurs stopped. Reporters leaned forward, fingers hovering over their keyboards. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every subtle movement between the two women. The tension wasn't loud. It was quiet but magnetic, stretching out each passing second. Crockett's eyes remained fixed. She wasn't waiting to speak first. She was waiting to respond last. Aides shifted nervously. A soft cough broke the silence. Even the air in the chamber felt heavier, as if everyone sensed that something significant was about to unfold. This wasn't going to be a routine political debate. It was a moment of truth, where image would meet authenticity. Within minutes, one sentence would capture national attention. And as Jasmine Crockett slowly adjusted her microphone, one silent question filled the room. Who would blink first? The chairman yielded the floor to Representative Ilhan Omar. The lights seemed brighter now, the energy sharper. Omar leaned in slightly, her hands clasped, her voice steady but firm. Representative Crockett, she began, you've made quite a name for yourself lately by criticizing those of us working tirelessly for justice. You say you fight for equality, but much of what you say sounds personal. Leadership isn't built on outrage. A quiet gasp moved through the room. Cameras clicked. Reporters took notes rapidly. Crockett didn't react. She blinked once, her pen tapping softly against her notebook. Omar's voice grew stronger. It's easy to talk on TV, to go viral online, but some of us have been in this work long before the cameras showed up. Real change doesn't come from attention, it comes from action. She gestured toward the photographers in the back. Maybe it's time the cameras focus on something that truly matters. Her aides exchanged small nods. Omar was composed, confident, and clearly in control of her message. But as she continued, the tone of her remarks shifted. This wasn't about debating ideas anymore. It was about challenging the person across from her. When the camera turned to Crockett, the contrast was striking. Omar was animated, expressive, passionate. Crockett was completely still, calm, focused, and observant, as though she was waiting for the right moment. Omar's tone hardened. You speak of accountability, she said firmly, but I haven't seen you standing alongside the communities you talk about. You criticize those who've risked their careers for peace and justice. So tell me, Congresswoman, do you truly fight for justice, or are you performing for applause? The room fell silent. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to pause. Reporters looked up from their screens, realizing they might have just heard the line that would dominate headlines. The chairman shifted uneasily in his seat. Omar leaned back, folding her arms, appearing certain that she had delivered her point. Crockett didn't reply right away. The silence that followed was powerful, heavy enough to change the atmosphere in the room. Omar's confident look began to fade as that quiet lingered. Then, slowly and deliberately, Jasmine straightened her notes, clicked her pen closed, and looked up. Her voice was calm and steady. Congresswoman Omar, she began, her tone clear and even. I've spent my entire career standing with people who never had cameras to tell their story. I don't need a spotlight to understand my purpose. The room grew stiller. It wasn't anger in her voice. It was control. The type of control that makes everyone listen. Omar adjusted her microphone, glancing briefly at her notes. But the energy had already shifted. Crockett continued, her tone unwavering. You've spoken passionately about justice today, But I've learned something here, something few are willing to admit. Justice isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who listens when everyone else has finished talking. A soft wave of murmurs spread through the chamber. Omar opened her mouth to respond, but the chairman raised his hand. Representative Omar, please allow Representative Crockett to finish. Crockett nodded slightly, maintaining eye contact. Her voice carried more weight now. You question my commitment to justice, she said. But when I speak for those who don't have the resources to promote their message, who can't organize rallies, who can't turn truth into a performance. The word performance lingered in the air. It struck deeply. The crowd reacted with hushed gasps. Reporters began typing quickly. Everyone could feel the shift in momentum. Omar's confidence dimmed, her expression tightened. Her aides looked down, avoiding her eyes. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, calm and unshaken. Her eyes softened slightly, but her focus never left Omar. She wasn't done yet, but everyone could already sense it. The balance had changed. Omar may have spoken first, but Crockett was clearly preparing to deliver the final, defining statement. The cameras zoomed in again. Every light, every lens, every quiet breath in the chamber centered on Jasmine Crockett. Her next words would decide the tone of the day. I in the back row. A reporter whispered, "This moment is going viral." The air in the room had shifted completely. What had started as Omar's stage now felt like Crockett's courtroom. Every sound, every movement revolved around her. Crockett remained still, her hand resting lightly on a closed folder, her face calm and unreadable. Across from her, Omar tried to maintain composure, but her tight shoulders and clenched jaw told a different story. The look of someone realizing, too late, that they had lost control of the moment. Crockett carefully adjusted her microphone, leaned forward, and began to speak. Her voice wasn't loud or rushed. It was calm, steady, and confident. "Congresswoman Omar," she said, her tone filled with quiet strength. "I admire passion. It takes courage to stand in this room and defend what you believe in. But passion without truth doesn't lead to progress. It just becomes noise." A low murmur swept through the room. She wasn't shouting, yet her words carried more weight than any raised voice could. Omar tried to smile, keeping her composure. "I believe the public can tell the difference between noise and justice," she replied, hoping to steer the moment back in her favor. Crockett nodded slightly, as though acknowledging an answer that missed the mark. "Oh, they'll decide," she said evenly. "They always do. The real question is, when people listen to you, do they hear confidence or confusion?" The audience grew tense, sensing the power in her words. Even the silence felt heavy now. Jasmine rested her hand on a folder before her, tapping it once with intent, but not yet opening it. "You've said I seek attention," she continued. "But I don't speak for the cameras. I speak for accountability." She paused, letting her words linger. "When I talk about justice, I'm not talking about trending slogans or catchy headlines. I'm talking about mothers who struggle to lay their children to rest, and women losing their homes because the system forgot about them." Omar's expression changed, her confidence slipping as Jasmine began shifting the tone of the discussion. This was no longer a debate. It was a statement of purpose. Crockett's voice deepened slightly, her southern rhythm firm yet calm. "You talk about fighting for peace," she said. "But peace doesn't come from speeches. It comes from standing in rooms like this one, where it's uncomfortable, where applause doesn't come easy, and speaking the truth even when it costs you something." Reporters hurried to capture every word. The chairman leaned forward, sensing something powerful was unfolding. Omar tried to interrupt, saying, "Congresswoman, with all due respect," but Jasmine raised her hand gently, stopping her. "Respect," she said quietly, "isn't something you say. It's something you show. You'll have mine when you start giving yours." The word struck hard, though she never raised her voice. The crowd reacted instantly. Even the cameras drew closer. Omar leaned back slightly, her earlier confidence fading fast. Finally, Jasmine opened her folder. Inside were pages of official documents, neatly highlighted, facts that spoke for themselves. She turned a few pages, the faint rustle filling the silence. "You said I don't stand with the communities I represent," she said. Let's see. She held up a page. House Resolution 2098, the Women's Protection and Relief Act, passed last year. You voted no. House Resolution 3120, the Family Safety Bill. You voted no again. Yet just last month, you said you've always supported women in crisis. How does that align? The room filled with whispers. Reporters typed faster, and Omar shuffled through her notes, clearly unprepared for the challenge. Crockett stayed composed, her tone firm but respectful, focused not on anger, but on truth. You talk about justice like it's just an idea, Jasmine said quietly. But it's more than that. Justice keeps record. It remembers every word, every action, and every person who had to bear the cost. For a brief moment, the camera caught Omar's face. The strong confidence she carried into the room began to fade, replaced by hesitation. Jasmine leaned back slightly and closed her folder with calm finality. I've never needed to perform, Congresswoman, she said gently. I just show up every single time. The chamber went completely still. Even the low hum of the air vent seemed to stop. In the back row, a reporter leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "That wasn't politics, that was truth." Omar drew a slow breath, her fingers tightening around her pen until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to respond, to reclaim control, but the atmosphere had shifted. The audience was no longer waiting for her. Every eye was fixed on Jasmine. Crockett folded her hands, her tone lowering to something almost intimate. You asked if I speak for applause, she said. I don't. I speak for the people who never got one, the ones no one claps for, but whose lives still matter. For a moment, it didn't feel like a hearing anymore. It felt like a reckoning. The audience sat frozen, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Omar said nothing. She couldn't, not yet. She just stared ahead, realizing that Jasmine had quietly turned her own arguments into the very truth now confronting her. And Jasmine, calm, steady, unshaken, looked back at her opponent, not with pride or mockery, but with certainty. She knew the impact hadn't fully landed yet, but when it did, it would close more than a debate. It would close a chapter. The silence in the chamber changed. It wasn't fear now, it was admiration. Jasmine Crockett hadn't raised her voice once, but the strength in her restraint spoke volumes. Omar sat still, the confident spark in her eyes dimming into quiet calculation. Jasmine glanced down at her folder again, the papers gleaming faintly under the lights. She turned one page slowly, deliberately. The sound of paper against paper filled the room, like a quiet drumbeat. Then she spoke again, her voice calm, but sharper than before. Congresswoman Omar, she began, you've built your reputation on the word justice. You've said it in interviews, in speeches, and in nearly every statement you've made. But justice without consistency isn't leadership, it's performance. The audience stirred. Reporters glanced at one another, sensing something monumental about to unfold. Jasmine lifted a page and held it up for the cameras. This, she said clearly, is a statement you made last spring, calling for protection of women affected by political conflict. You said, and I quote, "Any nation that fails to protect its women has failed humanity." She lowered the page, then raised another. And yet, just a few months later, when this very chamber voted on a bill to extend emergency protections to displaced women overseas, you voted no. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. The sound of reporters typing filled the air. Omar blinked, visibly shaken, leaning toward her microphone, but Jasmine didn't pause. You explained it as a procedural disagreement, she continued, her tone steady but empathetic. But Congresswoman, the women who needed that help didn't care about procedure. They cared about survival, and they needed your vote. Omar opened her mouth, but no words came. She glanced at her aides for support. One lowered his gaze. Another whispered something quickly, shaking his head. The moment spoke louder than anything she could have said. Jasmine placed the paper flat on the table, her movements calm and deliberate. I could stop here, she said softly. But that wouldn't be fair, to the record or to the truth. She opened another folder, thicker and heavier, filled with marked pages and highlighted notes. This is your campaign's official platform from 2 years ago, she continued. You promised unwavering support for refugee families affected by war. But last year, when the funding renewal came up, you weren't there for the vote. A wave of murmurs moved through the audience. C-SPAN's camera zoomed in on Omar's face, catching a small tremor in her lip. Jasmine didn't smirk or gloat. She didn't have to. Her words weren't about anger. They were about accuracy. Omar finally found her voice, tense but controlled. Those votes involve complex factors, and you know as well as I do that. Complex for you. Jasmine interrupted softly, but simple for them. She gestured toward the gallery, where several women sat quietly. Survivors, advocates, people living with the real-world consequences of those policies. One woman in the second row wiped away a tear. The camera caught it. That single moment would soon replay across social media and television screens nationwide. Turning back to Omar, Jasmine's tone stayed steady. You say I speak for attention, she said, but I'm not the one turning justice into a slogan. Justice doesn't need slogans, Congresswoman. It needs results. It needs votes that align with promises. The chairman shifted uneasily in his seat. Order, he said, but it was clear no one was ready to move on. Even Omar's colleagues avoided her gaze, pretending to review their papers, silently wishing they were elsewhere. Jasmine picked up one final sheet. This, she said, holding it carefully, is a letter from a Minnesota aid worker, someone from your own district, who wrote that her request for funding went unanswered for months. Her program helped young girls escaping violence. Her voice softened as she began to read. We reached out to every office that promised support. What we received was silence, silence louder than any refusal. Omar lowered her eyes, her hands tightening together. The entire room went still, the kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. It was no longer a debate. It was testimony. Jasmine lowered the letter and spoke gently. I don't question your intentions, Congresswoman, but intentions alone don't protect people. Actions do. The line struck deep. It wasn't an attack. It was truth, delivered with clarity. That made it even more powerful. Neither woman spoke for a long moment. Then Jasmine leaned back, folding her hands calmly. When I say I fight for justice, she said, I mean it. Not because it looks good on a banner, but because real lives depend on it. The camera zoomed in as her expression stayed composed and strong. In the press section, one journalist whispered, She just dismantled her gracefully. Another added under their breath, That wasn't a debate. That was history unfolding in real time. Omar finally looked up, her expression tense, but controlled. She adjusted her microphone, forcing a faint smile. With all due respect, she began, her tone brittle. You seem more focused on headlines than solutions. I've spent years working for the causes you only talk about online. It was an attempt to regain the upper hand, to sound confident, but it fell flat. The words carried effort, not conviction. Jasmine leaned forward, resting her arms lightly on the desk. She didn't rush. Her reply came soft and clear. Sound bites? She repeated. No, Congresswoman. I'm focused on accountability, the part that comes after the sound bite. A few gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters instinctively leaned in closer. The energy in the room shifted again. Omar tried to recover. You're twisting my record, she said quickly. This is politics. You take one vote and call it hypocrisy. You don't understand how complex international policy really is. Jasmine waited for her to finish before responding. Then, in a calm voice that carried effortlessly across the chamber, she said, I understand something simpler. That leadership without empathy is just theater. And Congresswoman, no one performs empathy quite like you. The room went silent. Even the chairman froze mid-note. The line landed like a quiet thunderclap. After a pause long enough to feel eternal, Jasmine continued, her tone steady and unhurried. You talk about unity, yet every room you enter grows divided. You speak about humanity, but your silence always finds the wrong moments. And people are beginning to notice. Omar blinked, visibly shaken. That's not true, she said softly, but even she seemed unsure whether she believed it. Jasmine spoke up quietly, shaking her head with calm conviction. What's truly unreasonable, she said, is acting like compassion belongs to one side of politics. Her tone wasn't harsh. It carried a simple honesty that cut through the noise. Every word felt precise, deliberate, and sincere. For the first time, Omar looked uneasy, her confidence fading as she glanced toward the chairman, hoping to change the direction. But Jasmine wasn't done. "You've built your platform on outrage," she continued, eyes never leaving Omar. "But outrage without purpose doesn't help anyone. It just becomes noise, and people are tired of the noise." The room stirred as phones began recording. What was supposed to be a hearing now felt like a defining moment. Then Jasmine did something unexpected. She reached into her folder and pulled out a small handwritten card. "I keep this with me," she said, lifting it for all to see. "It's a note my grandmother gave me years ago. It says, 'When a voice trembles, truth is trying to speak.'" She turned directly toward Omar. "And Congresswoman," she added gently, "for all your speeches, your voice has never trembled for anyone but yourself." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, soft murmurs, and flashing cameras filled the chamber. Even Jasmine's colleagues behind her looked stunned. It wasn't a personal attack. It was a revelation, a truth that landed so firmly. The room itself seemed to hold its breath. Omar opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. She tried again, her voice catching slightly, just enough to make Jasmine's point echo in real time. The chairman tapped the gavel and called for order, but his voice was drowned out by the low rumble of whispers and the click of reporters typing. Jasmine leaned back in her seat, composed as ever. "I don't need to end anyone's career," she said softly. "Truth takes care of that on its own." The words hung in the air like the final note of a song that everyone knew would replay again and again. Reporters were already whispering headline drafts. "Crockett delivers the moment of the year," one said. Within minutes, clips began spreading online, captioned with Jasmine's quote, "When a voice trembles, truth is trying to speak." Back in the chamber, Omar sat still, her focus broken. She adjusted her notes, avoiding Jasmine's eyes. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply gathered her papers, closing each folder carefully, as if wrapping up another ordinary day. That quiet confidence, the grace under pressure, made the moment even more powerful. The chairman finally spoke again. "Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett," he said awkwardly, his tone full of respect. Jasmine gave a single nod. "Always a pleasure to speak truth to power," she replied, her voice steady, dignified, and final. As she stood and walked out, the camera followed her every move. No one said a word. Even Omar's allies stayed silent, their attention fixed on the woman who had just changed the tone of the entire room. Jasmine didn't say much after that day. She let the moment speak for itself. That choice only made her presence stronger. Once again, silence became her greatest strength. Later that night, she quietly opened her social media and posted a single line. "Truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs courage." No hashtags, no tags, just that. Within minutes, the post spread across the internet, reaching millions of people around the world. What started as a political hearing had now become something far bigger. Clips of Jasmine's speech began appearing on motivational pages, podcasts, and talk shows. Her words were being quoted by teachers, lawyers, and community leaders as an example of calm integrity under pressure. In schools, students replayed the video during debate sessions. In offices, her quotes showed up in presentations. Even comedians mentioned her moment, not to make fun, but to admire the composure she showed. She had become something rare, a public figure people trusted. Meanwhile, Congresswoman Omar stayed silent. At first, her quietness seemed like composure, but as days passed, it began to feel like retreat. Journalists waited outside her office. Cameras followed her every step, and news outlets replayed her stillness again and again. The internet that once celebrated her was now analyzing her downfall in slow motion. Through it all, Jasmine remained steady. She attended meetings, greeted constituents, and handled her work with the same calm precision as always. She never gloated, never made it personal. One afternoon, a reporter caught up with her on the Capitol steps and asked, "How does it feel to be called the voice that ended an era?" Jasmine smiled softly and replied, "I didn't end anything. Truth just spoke loudly enough for everyone to finally hear it. That line spread like wildfire. A new wave of admiration began, not because she shouted, but because she didn't have to. The world wasn't watching politics anymore. It was watching a shift, a new kind of leadership built on composure, strength, and honesty. Weeks went by, but the echo of Jasmine's words stayed everywhere. Her quote, "When a voice trembles, truth is trying to speak," was now printed on posters, quoted in classrooms, and repeated on podcasts across the world. It wasn't just a trending phrase anymore. It had become a symbol of courage in an age of noise. Inside her office, morning sunlight spilled across her desk as she signed letters from supporters. Her staff worked quietly, focused, without chaos. They weren't chasing attention anymore. They were living in the middle of it. "Ma'am," her communications director said gently, "we've received invitations from The View, Morning Joe. Even Time magazine wants to feature Eichel opponents." Looked up. Not out of curiosity, but out of respect, AS, she took her seat. An older representative leaned toward her and whispered, "You've changed something in here, Crockett." She smiled politely and replied, "I didn't change anything. I just reminded everyone what this room is supposed to be for." It wasn't caught on camera, but that small exchange captured everything she had stood for. Outside Washington, her message continued to spread. Universities invited her to speak about integrity. Civil rights groups quoted her words in campaigns about courage. Even young creators online began editing her speeches into motivational videos, blending her calm voice with powerful music. That IT was no longer about viral fame. It had become a legacy point. One quiet evening, long after her staff had gone home, Jasmine stood by her window, looking out at the Capitol dome, shining against the night sky. She remembered the sting of that original confrontation, the moment she could have reacted with anger, but chose truth instead. That choice had changed everything. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared from her grandmother's old friend in Dallas. "She finally heard you, baby." The world did too. Jasmine smiled softly, set her phone down, and whispered a simple thank you. In the end, it wasn't the argument people remembered. It wasn't even the defeat of an opponent. It was the calm, the quiet strength of a woman who didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. As the city lights glowed below, one thing became clear. In a time filled with noise, silence spoken with conviction can move the world. That was her legacy. Not the moment she ended someone's career, but the moment she reminded a nation what true leadership sounds like when truth speaks for itself.